America is collapsing in silence, and what you're about to hear is the truth nobody in power wants exposed. Great Depression 2.0 isn't coming, it's already here, swallowing millions of Americans who now live in third-world conditions unimaginable a decade ago. Families sleeping in cars, professionals lining up at food banks, entire neighborhoods decaying into forgotten zones of survival. This is not a recession. This is a national downgrade. And if you think you're safe, think again. Before we continue, like, share, and subscribe, because this story will change how you see the country you thought you knew. America is standing in a moment that feels eerily familiar, a moment where the past whispers warnings into the present, and the shadows of the 1930s stretch across modern streets. The headlines say everything is fine, jobs are up, markets are stable, optimism is encouraged, yet behind those polished numbers lies a nation quietly unraveling. This isn't the kind of collapse that comes with explosions or dramatic footage, it's the slow, silent kind that starts inside homes, neighborhoods, and wallets long before it reaches national screens. Families who once lived comfortably now whisper about overdue bills. Parents who once planned for vacations now plan for survival. Middle-class Americans who used to offer help are now the ones desperately needing it. Everywhere you look, there's a quiet desperation replacing the old American confidence. Grocery carts get lighter. Gas tanks rarely see full. Dinner portions shrink. Bank balances hover near zero. People aren't just struggling, they're sinking, but the sinking is so gradual most don't realize how deep they've fallen until they hit the bottom. And the bottom today looks shockingly like the conditions America once associated with distant, impoverished nations. Homes with failing plumbing. Neighborhoods with broken streetlights. Families sharing single rooms. Workers sleeping in their cars. What makes this moment even more chilling is the denial around it. Leaders insist the economy is strong. Media personalities dismiss concerns as exaggeration. But the truth isn't in the speeches, it's in the everyday lives of millions living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from collapse. This is why observers now call it Great Depression 2.0, not because a sudden crash happened, but because the same foundational cracks that defined the 1930s are back, just hidden under layers of modern branding. And as America slips deeper into this silent crisis, a new form of poverty has emerged, one that looks modern on the outside, but feels third world on the inside. A poverty disguised by smartphones, paved roads, and retail stores, yet defined by empty fridges, unstable housing, and daily survival decisions most never imagined facing. It's the quiet beginning of a new era, one where the nation's decline doesn't look like the past, but feels exactly like it. The term third world conditions once felt distant, reserved for places without infrastructure, stable governments, or economic opportunity. But in today's America, the definition has evolved, because the poverty unfolding now doesn't look like the images people expect. It's hidden behind suburban walls, inside aging apartment complexes, under flickering streetlights, and inside households that still project the illusion of normalcy. The United States has developed a new category of hardship, modern poverty with third-world symptoms. Step inside the homes of millions today, and you'll see realities that contradict the image of a prosperous nation. Families heating their apartments with ovens because utilities were shut off. Bathrooms with mold creeping across ceilings because landlords stopped caring. Children doing homework in parking lots because it's the only place with stable internet connection. Elderly neighbors rationing medication, stretching pills across days because refills are unaffordable. These aren't anecdotes, they're part of an expanding pattern of deprivation spreading across every state. What makes this poverty uniquely devastating is its invisibility. In other countries, struggling communities are obvious: cracked huts, muddy roads, open-air markets, unreliable electricity. But in America, poverty hides in plain sight behind closed doors and quiet shame. People keep their suffering private, terrified of judgment. They dim their lights to save money. They avoid guests because they're embarrassed. And they pretend everything is okay on social media, even when everything inside their home is falling apart. The infrastructure tells the same story. Water contaminants in small towns. Crumbling schools. Streets without maintenance. Public transportation barely functioning. Entire zip codes deteriorating faster than they can be repaired. These aren't isolated incidents, they're signals of a nation slipping toward conditions it once criticized abroad. And yet, America's poverty comes with a painful twist. the cost of living is so high that even those suffering third-world conditions pay first-world prices. Rent climbs. Groceries shrink. Essentials become luxuries. Survival becomes an expensive subscription model, trapping people in a cycle they can't escape. This is the new American paradox, a wealthy nation with millions living in invisible hardship, a land of opportunity where opportunity is slipping away. And as these third-world symptoms become normalized, a deeper truth emerges: the middle class didn't just shrink, it transformed into the new poor. As America sinks into these modern third-world conditions, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: the middle class didn't just weaken, it vanished almost overnight. The families who once symbolized stability, modest comfort, and financial breathing room are now squeezed into survival mode, wrestling with the same hardships they once believed could only happen somewhere far away. Section 2 exposed the uncomfortable reality of hidden poverty, but Section 3 reveals the engine behind it: a middle class quietly dismantled by decades of economic shifts that stole its foundation piece by piece. For years, wages froze while the costs of everything essential, housing, groceries, healthcare, transportation, surged relentlessly. People worked harder than ever, yet somehow fell further behind. What used to be achievable with one income now requires two or more, and even then, many households scrape by on fumes. The ladder that once allowed families to climb toward a better future didn't break suddenly, it rotted slowly, rung by rung, until millions reached for it and found nothing there. The disappearance wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. People didn't wake up poor one morning. Instead, they adjusted to every new burden, absorbing each financial hit as temporary, unaware that the temporary had quietly become permanent. Insurance premiums rose. Rent increased. Groceries shrank. Savings evaporated. And before long, millions who once fit the definition of middle class discovered they no longer belonged to it. Today, the middle class is more myth than reality, a nostalgic memory of an America that no longer exists. And with its collapse, a dangerous shift has occurred. Poverty is no longer a fringe condition, it is the new normal. As this new normal spreads, the next crisis becomes clear: the rise of homelessness among workers who do everything right yet still lose everything anyway. The collapse of the middle class naturally feeds into America's next unsettling transformation: a new homeless crisis, one unlike anything in previous generations. This isn't a wave driven primarily by addiction or mental illness, though those issues remain tragically real. No, this new wave is composed of people who follow every rule society sets: they work full-time jobs, pay taxes, show up on time, and try to stay afloat. Yet they're still pushed out of their homes by rent increases, shrinking wages, and the relentless cost of simply being alive. Today's working homeless population is one of America's darkest open secrets. Drive past store parking lots before sunrise and you'll spot workers emerging from their cars, changing clothes in the cold before heading into a shift. Visit all-night gyms and you'll see people showering quietly, hoping no one notices they don't have a home. Look inside storage units and you'll find belongings stacked like makeshift closets, filled by people who lost their apartments but still cling to their possessions. These aren't drifters, they are employees, parents, students, and retirees. In cities from coast to coast, tent communities grow near office buildings where many residents actually work. People earn paychecks that never stretch enough to secure stability. One unexpected bill, one corporate layoff, one rent hike, and the thin line between housed and homeless disappears instantly. This crisis didn't appear suddenly, it is the direct continuation of the vanishing middle class described in Section 3. When people are priced out of stability, homelessness becomes not a distant fear but an immediate possibility. And as more Americans slip into this new reality, one truth becomes undeniable: this is not personal failure, this is systemic collapse. As the working homeless crisis expands, another layer of collapse becomes impossible to ignore: inflation's silent victims, the people crushed not by dramatic life events but by the slow, grinding pressure of rising prices. Section 4 revealed how even full-time workers are pushed into homelessness, but Section 5 exposes those who fall through the cracks even faster: people who don't have the strength, income, or flexibility to keep adjusting to an economy that demands more than they can possibly give. These victims are often invisible in national conversations because they aren't loud, online, or politically connected. They are the elderly living on fixed income, the disabled unable to increase their earnings, the single parent stretching every dollar, and the chronically ill whose medical costs swallow whatever remains of their monthly budget. Inflation doesn't simply inconvenience them, it devours their entire stability. They watch groceries shrink, utility bills spike, transportation costs rise, and medications climb beyond affordability. Every increase feels like a direct attack on their survival. For these Americans, inflation doesn't mean cutting luxuries. It means cutting essentials. Skipping meals. Splitting pills. Watering down milk. Reusing disposable items. Waiting to fix broken appliances. Selling treasured belongings. Living with the constant fear that tomorrow will cost more than they can manage. The emotional burden is immense, a mix of shame, helplessness, and exhaustion that deepens every month. This group rarely receives attention, but they show the true severity of the crisis. When inflation crushes those least able to adapt, it signals a turning point, a society slipping toward systemic failure. And as these silent victims multiply, the consequences spread outward, shaping neighborhoods, infrastructure, and entire cities. Which leads directly into the next chapter, the rebirth of urban decay, where America's communities begin collapsing in ways that echo a nation losing its economic soul. The silent suffering of inflation's victims sets the stage for the next alarming transformation, the rise of ghost cities, communities hollowed out by economic abandonment and slow-motion decay. Section 5 exposed how everyday people are crushed by rising costs, but Section 6 shows what happens when entire regions face the same pressure. They begin to crumble, street by street, building by building, until the decay becomes impossible to hide. Walk through many American downtowns and the signs of collapse are unmistakable. Once busy storefronts now sit empty, windows dusty and dark. Restaurants that served generations of families are replaced by "for lease" signs. Entire city blocks feel frozen in time, like modern ruins waiting for someone to care again. Streetlights flicker, sidewalks crack, and trash gathers in corners no one bothers to clean. Even wealthier cities show pockets of decline, but in struggling areas, the decay has become the dominant landscape. This new urban abandonment isn't caused by war or natural disaster. It's caused by economic exhaustion. When inflation squeezes residents, people move out. When businesses lose customers, they close. When tax revenue shrinks, repairs stop. Bit by bit, the infrastructure deteriorates, and a once thriving city transforms into a shell of its former self. Small towns face an even sharper collapse, as factories close and young people leave permanently, taking hope with them. Ghost cities reveal a deeper truth: when individuals can no longer survive financially, neither can the communities they inhabit. The decay of a city is simply the collective version of the struggles described in Sections 4 and 5. And as these hollowed-out neighborhoods multiply, the impact becomes generational, affecting not just adults but the people most vulnerable to instability, the children growing up amidst this modern American collapse. As the middle class fractures and communities slip into survival mode, the next phase of Great Depression 2.0 emerges quietly, almost invisibly at first: the breakdown of America's foundational systems. Roads crumble, public transit fades, hospitals overflow, and once bustling downtowns sink into eerie silence. But this collapse didn't erupt randomly, it accelerated the moment families stopped spending on anything beyond essentials. With local governments starved of revenue and businesses closing in clusters, entire cities begin to resemble abandoned industrial zones, stripped of opportunity and drained of hope. Yet the damage isn't only physical. When infrastructure fails, so does mobility, and with it the promise of upward movement. Workers who once commuted confidently now face unreliable transport, parents seeking medical care encounter endless wait times, students lose access to safe schools and functioning libraries. The everyday systems that quietly supported American life are dimming out, one district at a time, and the consequences ripple through every remaining pillar of daily life. Meanwhile, rural towns suffer differently but just as painfully. Their lifelines, small clinics, single grocery stores, volunteer fire departments, collapse under financial strain. When one service disappears, the rest follow like falling dominoes, turning stability into a distant memory. And as every region fights its own version of decline, the country's fractures widen. As the middle class fractures and communities slip into survival mode, the next phase of Great Depression 2.0 emerges quietly, almost invisibly at first: the breakdown of America's foundational systems. Roads crumble, public transit fades, hospitals overflow, and once bustling downtowns sink into eerie silence. But this collapse didn't erupt randomly, it accelerated the moment families stopped spending on anything beyond essentials. With local governments starved of revenue and businesses closing in clusters, entire cities begin to resemble abandoned industrial zones, stripped of opportunity and drained of hope. Yet the damage isn't only physical. When infrastructure fails, so does mobility, and with it the promise of upward movement. Workers who once commuted confidently now face unreliable transport, parents seeking medical care encounter endless wait times, students lose access to safe schools and functioning libraries. The everyday systems that quietly supported American life are dimming out, one district at a time, and the consequences ripple through every remaining pillar of daily life. Meanwhile, rural towns suffer differently but just as painfully. Their lifelines, small clinics, single grocery stores, volunteer fire departments, collapse under financial strain. When one service disappears, the rest follow like falling dominoes, turning stability into a distant memory. And as every region fights its own version of decline, the country's fractures widen. This deterioration sets the stage for the next escalation, a public desperate for answers, leaders scrambling for control, and a nation learning that when essential systems break, everything else teeters with them. Now the pressure shifts from failing structures to rising unrest. As the nation's backbone weakens, pressure surges onto institutions already stretched to their limits. Officials deliver promises, panels, and press conferences, yet every message feels thinner than the last. People don't want polished speeches, they want relief, answers, and action. But when solutions stall and living conditions deteriorate further, tension erupts in ways that echo the unrest of past economic crises. Neighborhoods begin organizing their own security groups, protests intensify, and once civil debates turn into charged confrontations fueled by fear, exhaustion, and frustration. Yet the unrest isn't merely emotional, it's structural. The economy now operates in survival mode, forcing millions into unstable jobs, gig work, and unpredictable pay cycles. Families who once lived comfortably now rotate between temporary income patches just to stay afloat. Each financial blow pushes them closer to desperation, and that desperation fuels a collective realization: the old systems may not recover quickly enough to save them, even if leaders insist recovery is underway. Government attempts targeted relief programs, but their reach is inconsistent, and many fall through the cracks. Cities deploy emergency measures, but limited funding turns bold plans into softened versions with minimal impact. With every failed or delayed solution, public patience thins, and communities begin crafting their own strategies. Some cooperative, others confrontational, creating a patchwork of survival techniques. This simmering volatility marks a turning point in Great Depression 2.0. What began as economic decline is now evolving into a national stress test of resilience and trust. The question shifts from how Americans will endure the downturn to whether the institutions designed to support them can withstand the storm ahead. As the unrest spreads and institutional trust erodes, America enters the most revealing phase of Great Depression 2.0, the rise of shadow economies and improvised survival systems. With traditional pathways collapsing, people turn to informal networks, barter circles, neighborhood exchanges, and underground job markets just to meet basic needs. What once seemed unthinkable, Americans trading labor for groceries, sharing generators, pooling medical supplies, now becomes normal in communities across the country. This shift doesn't happen overnight, it grows naturally from the frustration highlighted in the previous sections, forming a grassroots response to a failing national structure. Yet with resource scarcity comes risk. Scammers, opportunists, and predatory lenders exploit vulnerable families already stretched to their limits. Meanwhile, local power brokers, landlords, wholesalers, small distributors, quietly gain influence as communities rely on them for access to everyday necessities. The presence of these informal systems reveals a stark truth: when official institutions weaken, parallel ones rise quickly, reshaping how people live, work, and survive. These developments also expose deep inequality. Some neighborhoods build strong cooperative networks, while others fall prey to exploitation. And this divergence sets the stage for the final chapter: